first and foremost, turnover. And that's easy. You know, if you're in the facility enough, if you're fortunate enough to be near your loved one, you get to know. You become very close to those caregivers, just like your loved one does. They're part of your family. And you know when they start turning over. You clearly know if the administrator turns over. And many administrators are basically hired on the basis that they have in the past done a good job of, quote, filling the beds. And that's generally what most owners look for. They want a high census. That's how they make money. Little turnover in terms of residents and the staff turnover, nobody very much watches. For me, it's the #1 key ingredient. Your grandmother really likes it there, but your eye test tells you perhaps there's something else going on. If your grandmother is able to pass judgment on any number of issues, I would first and foremost listen to her. Because after all, she is the resident. She is the patient. She is the person that's getting that care and sees the third shift, sees the second shift. My guess is you're either in on the first shift or the second shift. Very few people go in the third shift, but I encourage all of our clients to go into the third shift. That's what we do, because that's usually where things happen. If you're in a skilled nursing facility, there's one set of requirements for record keeping. In an assisted living facility in most states, including Arkansas, whether it's a level 1 or a level 2, there is lesser record keeping. Having said that, I'll give you an example. In my mother's case, now I was complaining about the answering of call lights. And again, they weren't going to give me access to their computer system that would have shown clearly to me or the state who's right here. Is my mother right that she's not getting call lights answered? Am I right? Is my sister right? Or her caregivers that are in there right when they say they're not being answered? Computer records were never looked at and ultimately were destroyed. So we didn't have that. But once my mother had her accident, I went in and I did not routinely, and it was my mistake, I did not routinely look at her, what they call progress notes. And their defense always was, we don't have to document anything. Well, that's not really true. They have to document it at least when there are acuity changes, which means changes in mental or physical functionality. And what we had in my mother's notes for 9 months, right up through September of 2009, very copious notes, lots of notes, toileting, all these notes. Then I started complaining in September, which you would think would have brought the most attention, right? The most attention. So there was not a note in my mother's records for the next 2 months. It was like she was not in the facility. If I had looked at those notes every month, it would have raised a red flag. Are they looking at her? I would have gone to the administrator and said, why are there no notes? I'm complaining about call lights. It was all written. I'm not talking about anything oral here. It was all documented. I'm complaining, the state's looking, and we went into those records and the state said, that's okay, they don't have to do anything. And my answer back is yes, but look, they were doing a lot. For 9 months, they documented everything. And then for 2 months, prior to my mother's fall, up until the day of my mother's fall, for the last 2 months, nothing in her records. I would ask the administrator about her policies and procedures. She'll probably show you, he will probably show you 2 or 3 fine bound books of policies and procedures. I would ask a simple question, how do you train your staff in them? I want to know, and believe me, I don't think they need to know what's in all those 3 books. Most policies and procedures created by chains, created by experts for chains, and they can do some good, but they do no good if they're too voluminous for people to even read them, which way too often happens. So the question is to each of these levels, and you can do it. You don't have to set up an appointment and make a big deal out of it. Just sit down. You know, it's like management by walking around, right? You are a manager. You're an advocate. You're a communicator for your loved one in that facility. You have your eyes, you have your set of assessments, but you got to ask some questions. You got to look at some documents. Have lunch with them. Is the food getting better or worse? Have they changed the chef? These are the things. Most of all, have you changed in ownership? If you had a change in ownership, that should raise everything to the fore of your brain. You need to be looking at everything. Because almost inevitably, after takeovers or mergers, staff is changed over. The traditional staff you're used to are gone. The food budget is cut. Room rates probably go up. Lots of changes happen, and I can tell you, those angels, those heroes in there, can't do it all. They have to have support. They have to have an environment that nurtures them, that rewards them. And usually in these mergers, what you have is the exact opposite. You have tension, you have angst, you have anger. People are being fired that were friends of people that are still there. People are worried about their jobs. People are told that their salaries are going to be frozen, that their $10 an hour job is going to be eliminated. That creates tension in a facility. So ownership, management, if it's a mom and pop, talk to the owner. Usually the owners come through once or twice a month. Talk to them. Ask them the question. Those are the things that I would focus on. Always the individual. And I can tell you, it's not what the state focuses on. It's not what the plaintiffs' lawyers or defense lawyers or the owners, by and large, focus on. If you're in a chain, it's generally not what the regional vice president, who is generally in charge of a certain number of facilities, it's usually not what they focus on. If you find where they do, those are the ones to home in on, because even in a chain environment, they're good homes and bad homes. My experience with Beverly was typical of that. Beverly, back in the early 2000s, sold out of Florida. We felt we just couldn't do business there. We had too many lawsuits, and everybody knows how Florida was very lawsuit happy during those days before they got certain tort reform there. Well, the vast majority of our facilities in Florida were great facilities. They didn't have any claims. They didn't have any lawsuits. But we sold out completely. And that's why a chain, just because it has, whether it's Golden Living, Emeritus, Genesis, any of them, you can't just look at a chain and go, this is obviously going to be a good home because it has that brand. You've got to go into the home. Those homes vary just like hospitals. There's one level of care in one in another. And I can tell you, usually it is based in those events on a regional vice president and the administrator. They set the tone, they set the culture. And sometimes it's really good, and unfortunately, too many times, it's really bad.